Welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast. My name is Audrey Monkey, and I am your host. For more than 3 decades, I've been a summer camp director, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents. I really enjoy sharing stories, tips, and ideas to help others who care about young people raise a generation of kind, self-reliant, optimistic kids who become thriving adults. If you're interested in summer camp, parenting, or happiness, you've come to the right place. In episode 43, I'm thrilled to be talking with Jessica Lahey, author of the New York Times bestselling book, The Gift of Failure: How the Best Parents Learn to Let Go So Their Children Can Succeed. Jessica is also co-host with KJ Dell'Antonia of one of my favorite podcasts, #MWriting. So I'm really excited to have her on the Sunshine Parenting Podcast for this episode. Enjoy our chat. Well, I am so happy to have Jess Lahey on the podcast today. Welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much.
So to start with, why don't you just tell a little bit about yourself and your book, The Gift of Failure?
Sure thing. So I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for over 20 years, sort of every grade from 6 to 12, and never thought that's what I was going to be. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and then I started teaching and just fell in love with it. And so I've been doing that for, like I said, for over 20 years. And then I started writing full-time as well a couple of years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, when I wrote my first book. And so have been trying to keep that balance between, family and teaching and writing and all of that stuff, keep all the balls in the air.
Which it seems like you're doing a great job. You also have such a fun podcast, the #MWriting podcast, which is my weekly favorite that I listen to. So I love following your all the things that you're balancing. And I know it's probably not always easy, but boy, you make it look pretty good.
Well, I'm the one with only 2 kids. And in fact, one of them is off at college, but KJ, my co-host, has 4 kids. So she's got a barn full of horses, and they get up early to do the chores, and then there's haying season that happens, and then you have to do at least 2 cuts. And so she really has to keep even more balls in the air than I do. And I don't know how she does it, but I think, that's one of the things we talk about on the podcast a lot is, how do we balance our freelance work with our contracted book work, with our families, with our other jobs, with our animals, all that kind of stuff. So having a place to sit down once a week and talk about that stuff is really, it's our writer therapy session, and it's really fun.
It is so fun. And I love how you just touch on all things life, because, work and life are all kind of one big thing combined together. We kind of work, and we are friends with people we work with, and we have our kids and they get involved, and it's all just one big thing. So,
that makes it even more complicated sometimes. When your friends are also your colleagues and you love your job, it can become really, really easy to work too much and not be present for the other stuff in your life. So, I'm very lucky in that I love my job as much as I do, and my husband loves his job. But at the same time, we've been working really hard on, okay, if we're writing right now, we have to be present for writing. If we're parenting right now, we have to be present for parenting, that kind of thing, so that you can not let those things bleed over into other areas of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I really loved The Gift of Failure, so much, in fact, that I asked you years ago if we could use an excerpt in our camp's annual magazine, which you allowed us to do. So I have been promoting this book. I gave some away. Can you talk about how you came to write The Gift of Failure, the topic, why it became so important to you, and basically what's the big idea that you want people to take away from your book?
Around, what was it? 6 years ago, I started to notice that my students were not only less motivated, this was middle school, by the way, less motivated to learn. They were also having trouble learning in class, mainly because some of the tools that I use as a teacher that tend to work pretty well require kids to get frustrated. Like the tools I use that actually work best for learning require kids to be able to be a little bit frustrated and sit with their frustration and be resilient and take another stab at something. And that was getting more and more difficult for the kids. And so I had this sort of sneaking suspicion that it had something to do with the way we were teaching and parenting kids, that and it turns out that's true. I did, a couple of years of research and found that there's sort of two issues. If you're, tempting kids constantly with extrinsic motivators, like paying them for their grades or watching them through the portal and surveilling everything they do and, doing that kind of stuff, then you're taking away kids' motivation. Kids are less motivated when you do that. But at the same time, kids that are highly directed by their parents, kids who are, constantly told, okay, do step 1. Okay, now do step 2. Okay, now do step 3. No. Don't ask any questions. Just do it this way. Those highly directed kids are less able to be frustrated. They don't seem to build up the emotional wherewithal that they need to be frustrated and work through it. And as a teacher, that's a disaster, because kids who can't be frustrated do not learn as well as kids who can. And so it was not only true that the kids were being, sort of tempted into submission with these extrinsic motivators, and it was becoming all about the points and the scores and the grades, and then the extrinsic motivators were not working as well, and the parents were frustrated, but also these kids were less able to be frustrated, and therefore, I just sort of felt like things were falling apart in school, and I needed answers as to why. And at the same time, I found out that I was doing the exact same thing to my own children. And so as frustrated as I wanted to be with the parents of my students, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was parenting my own children into a state of helplessness as well. So I couldn't exactly throw stones.
Right. Well, I loved that part of your book, how you were parenting middle school. Like, I think you had a middle schooler while you were writing, plus you were teaching them. So you had the experience from both sides. You saw the dilemma that parents have. And I remember there's one story in the book where you talk about, the homework sitting on the coffee table.
Right.
And I mean, I think every parent has had that experience, and I have too. And it's so hard because then, you just like, it feels kind of mean not to just, you just run it over. But now they have all those signs out at schools saying, parents, don't drop anything off, don't do it. And it's so true, because gosh, your kid forgetting something in 4th grade is a lesson and a chance to remember next time. And when we do everything, that's not guiding our kids into being self-sufficient and able to do things on their own at all.
Well, and the way that story ends actually is with that day actually led to a real breakthrough for my kid. And now it's been 5 years since that original experience. And the solution he came up with on that day, because he was kept in by his teacher, and his teacher said, you really had to come up with a solution. The solution he came up with that day is the solution he uses to this day in order to be organized. And if I had taken the homework that day, I don't know when that breakthrough would have happened. It might have taken another 6 months. I don't know. But I do know that day, not taking the homework was one of the most important parenting moves I've made in terms of my kid's organization and ability to take responsibility for, his stuff and his tasks and his plans.
Yeah, I know you have, there's a part of this book where you talk about there's no longer room in our children's schedules for leisure time in the woods, let alone opportunities to problem solve their way out of the muck and mire they encounter out there. And it just reminds me of summer camp, of course. And I know we've talked before about camp, and one of the things that about school, like even middle school, when the kids are at school, they don't have their parents there. So it's one of those opportunities to learn to problem solve on their own. And if teachers and parents are on the same page and can both realize that's the goal. The goal is not to get every homework assignment done and on time. The goal is to get this kid to grow into someone who is able to take responsibility and problem solve. And I think camp, and I know you have some experience with camp yourself with your kids, is one of those great opportunities where kids do get really a chance to truly get out into the woods, into the muck. And the other thing that's really great about camp is they're often doing things that are out of their comfort zone and they're not good at. And I love that they really experience often for the first time, some of these kids who are real high achieving kids, and they're, they do some sport year round and they're really good and they are really good at school. And then they come to camp and, suddenly they're doing archery and it's like, they're not that great at it, or they have to work at it. And it's a really good experience for them to see that you don't have to be good at everything.
Well, and the other thing that's really interesting about camp, so I was a camper as a kid. I went to Chimney Corners. It's a YMCA camp in Beckett, Massachusetts. My sister went my sister went from the time she was a junior until she was staff. So she went for like 12 years or some crazy amount of time. My older son went to Coniston in New Hampshire and went on to be staff there. And then what's really interesting is my younger son went and hated it, absolutely hated it. It just wasn't a great experience for him for various reasons. So we asked him to go a second year because his first year there were it was just a bad match with the other kids in the cabin, and he was the oldest, and it just didn't work out very well. And we asked him to go for the second year. And then we said he didn't have to go anymore if it really wasn't his thing. And he's also an introvert. And the second year wasn't great either. But the really interesting thing is, even though for 2 years in a row, he didn't have the best, most amazing camp experience, he still learned so much about himself. He learned what's right for him and what's not right for him. He learned what to do. As an introvert, he sort of feels like he needs time to himself. And so he would go sit on a bench by himself with a journal and write some stuff. And kids would come up to him and say, "What's wrong with you? Why are you being so isolated?" And he learned how to speak up for himself and say, "No, I just need this time, for myself." And, I'm really glad that we sent him for 2 years, even though it ended up not being his favorite experience. It was still a really valuable experience for him. It's been, and I love that, the introduction to Homesick and Happy by Michael Thompson. He talks about that experience when he goes in to speak, and he asks the parents in the room to think about the time when they really, really accomplished something great. And then he asks them to raise their hands if their parents were there when it happened.
Oh, I love that. I really remember that.
So often it's not. And I know for me, no, my parents were not there at the moments when I'm most proud of myself for solving a problem. They were there to cheer me on when I got home, and they were there to support me and tell me how proud they were of me, but they were not actually present when I was, accomplishing that thing, because I needed to do it by myself. It was part of becoming who I am and not just an extension of them.
Right. Oh, I love Homesick and Happy. We actually sent it to all of our first year families.
So good.
It's such a good book. And it's such a good reminder that, like you said, even for your son, who it wasn't like a 100% positive experience or something that he wanted to keep doing, he still grew. Like it was like he learned more about himself and he grew from the experience and that kind of thing. So that's really, that's so, so good.
Well, the other thing that happened that was so funny is he got lost going to activity, and he couldn't figure out where he was going the first day, and he went to the wrong place and he was super late. And he wrote about that in a letter that he sent to me. And of course, by the time I get the letter, it's all been worked out. And so the mom in me felt the need to write to his big brother and say, "A couple days ago, probably a week ago now, Finn got lost. Could you just check in on him, make sure everything's okay?" And of course it was, because it was a whole week later by the time I was able to butt my head into the situation.
Right.
But he figured it out. He had to talk to adults. He had to negotiate. He had to figure stuff out. And I'm really proud of him for having to have those, having had those experiences.
Sure. So you are speaking, I know you go around a lot and speak to parents at schools and teachers. And do you also speak to kids as well when you're visiting schools?
Yeah, the way I often will do schools is I speak to the kids during the day, and then the teachers in professional development in the afternoon, and teachers in the evening, parents in the evening. And the fun thing about that is I get the opportunity to ask the kids what they'd like me to tell their parents. And I also ask the kids a few questions that I sort of report back on to the parents in a general sense. So it's a really nice way for me to get everyone on the same page from a vocabulary standpoint, talking about, extrinsic motivators or intrinsic motivation or directive parenting, so that if the kids feel like they want to talk to their parents about needing more autonomy or whatever, they have those words and the parents had heard them as well. So it's a really nice way to sort of close the loop on all this stuff.
Oh, I just think it's phenomenal. I know all parents would benefit so much from hearing you speak. And so I hope you continue. You're going to still be on the speaking circuit next school year?
Yep, it's all booked up for next year. You know, some of the stuff that I'm writing about for my next book is sort of sliding in because it dovetails really well. But essentially, I'm still doing the gift of failure stuff all over the place. I'm going all over the place this fall. I've had to cut back a tiny bit this year because of writing the new book, but it's one of my favorite things to do. I love speaking. It's so much fun, and I really just have to pinch myself, you know, and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is my job, is to go and teach. It's a dream.
Oh, it's so awesome. Well, I've heard you speak just at some conferences, but I really want to come to one of your school ones. So I'm going to try to get there next year. I wanted to let listeners know about the brand new book group discussion guide that you have available on your website. So do they just need to go to your website? How do they I downloaded it and I have it printed out here, but I can't remember how exactly people get that. Can you explain?
So if you go to jessicalahey.com and you sign up for my email list, you'll get an auto reply email with not only that, but like I have a whole video series, Gift of Failure, Frequently Asked Questions, which answers questions, everything from like, how do you motivate a kid who's coasting? How do you, what do I do about my special needs kid? How do you help your anxious perfectionist kids be a little braver? And the answer to the question, actually, how do I get my kid to shower, is there too. So you'll get all of those resources, and sort of the articles people ask me about the most are all in this big email. So you'll get links to all of that stuff when you subscribe at jessicalahey.com.
That is so awesome. I hope most parents have read your book, but if they haven't, I think it's still, you have an audiobook too. I think I both listened to it and got it as a real book. And it's one, like I just told you before we started recording, I pulled mine back out. It has sticky notes all over it, highlighting. It's still so good. So it's one of those ones that it's not that it was the book for 4 years ago or whenever it came out. It is ongoing. I think any parent who's, especially as their kids start, you know, they're coming out of that kind of early elementary, they're getting a little bit older, and you need to kind of have tools for figuring out, okay, so what are the ways that I'm going to help this kid be able to do more for themselves a year from now than what they're doing now. And I think you really help answer that and guide people. So it's such a great book. Highly recommend. And what a great idea. Like if you're starting the school year, maybe getting a group of parents together to read the book, or go find if they can go to a speaking event near them or something like that.
Not only that, I do a lot of, so often teachers, a faculty will do it as a sort of a staff read, or a bunch of parents will get together and sort of meet in the school library to talk about the book and use the discussion questions. And I Skype into those sometimes. I just Skyped into one in Colorado just last week. Oh
my gosh. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to do one in my town then, because I live near Fresno, and you know, it's just not a place that people come to very often. I couldn't even get them to get screenagers to come to my school, which I'm like, so I always have to go other places. So, so that would be such a great opportunity. So yeah, parents, if you get a group together and read the book together and want to have Jessica, that's amazing. Yep. So that's really cool. Okay.
Skype has made it so that I know a whole bunch of authors who do that. And what's really fun is often picture book authors will do it for little kids. Oh. And a bunch of my friends who write picture books do these Skype and author thing. It's a thing. It's something that, authors are trying to convince or trying to encourage teachers to take advantage of, and teachers are trying to, figure out who they want to Skype with. And it's a really fun thing to do because I live in the boonies of New Hampshire, and getting to Fresno, it's tough. Right. So if I could just Skype in, it's great.
Oh my gosh, that is so great. You know what? One of the things about you, and I think one of the reasons why your book has done so well and so many people have read it and know you, is because of your accessibility. You're very much available to, you answer emails, and you have your podcast, and you do all this speaking. So what a great way to keep your message going, this important message that you have. It's awesome.
Well, the fun thing is that the book really covers, the heart of the book is middle school, but the book really covers parenting, little kids, nursery school, preschool kind of kids, all the way up into college. And so there's this thing that happens where, parents will read it when the kids are littler and then revisit, especially the whole chapter on middle school once their kids get a little bit older. And in the book, there's all these things like, what can we expect kids to be capable of doing at certain ages? And, as a kid gets older, I wanted this to be the kind of book where you can go back repeatedly and sort of check in and see, how are things going and what should my kid be able to do and that sort of stuff.
Well, that's what it does. It's so good. It's so funny because this week for camp, I was getting ready. I was just kind of revising some stuff for our training. And one of the things is age group characteristics and their needs. And it was really interesting just looking at it again. And really, as a parent, like you were a middle school teacher, so you really were trained and that was your focus for so long. And then you end up having to parent all ages. And there's some things that you can do all along that's very helpful, but it really is good as parents to step back and look at some of the resources for different age groups when your kids get there, especially if it's an age group you don't have any experience with.
You know what book is fantastic for that also is a book called Touch Points. That outlines every single developmental, like every single stage and what kids can do and what's happening in their brains and what's happening with manual dexterity and all that kind of stuff. It's a really great book for, preschool all the way. Really, it's, I guess, through like middle school.
Okay, great. I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, I love
that. Sounds really good. I need to pick that one up because that would be good as a resource for camp counselors too. So sounds like a really good one.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for the juniors. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Okay. So I want to switch gears. You mentioned your new book, and I wanted, one of the things that I've heard you talk about a lot is that you are actually still doing teaching. You're teaching kids in a rehab, or are they high schoolers, or what are you teaching now?
So I teach in an inpatient drug and alcohol rehab. And of course, the main focus of the rehab is, is the kids getting better and doing their recovery, but they still have to be in school. So every single day is a different course. And so I teach on Fridays. That's their writing day. And I try not to be out of town on those days. And, I'm so excited. I was looking at my schedule and I realized I have this vast expanse of Fridays that are protected. And so I won't be missing class. But I go in and I teach on Fridays, and the youngest kid I've had there is like 12 going on 13. And then the oldest, once they're 18, they get kicked up to the men's unit. And usually, in the classrooms, usually you're somewhere around 10 or 12. And yeah, we just work on our writing, and I try to help them feel confident in their reading and their writing. Some days just hooking the kids up with a book that they're going to start reading and stick with is my big goal for the day. So it's a very different environment than the school where I was teaching before this, which was a very sort of kids, a high-powered, independent school where kids, had lots of love and lots of resources and, have gotten a great education all the way through. And that's just not the case with the kids that I teach now at the rehab.
Which also lends itself very well to your new book, which is different, but like you said, it's related to your interest in basically raising thriving kids. I mean, all of this goes to the same end. So talk about a little bit about your new book. I know it's not coming out for a while, but just what you're writing about now or researching.
Yeah, so I'm researching how to prevent addiction in kids. And the problem has been for a while that the what addiction has been changing. We saw it as, for a long time, it had to do with moral failures and that kind of thing. And then we talked about it exclusively as a disease. And then we've also talked about it as some people have what's called a developmental model. So what addiction actually is and what causes it is we're still learning so much. And then looking at what the causes are and what actually increases the risk of addiction, I'm going deeply into that and then trying to figure out what, based on the evidence that's out there, based on the research that's out there, what are the best ways to prevent addiction in kids? And even though we have a lot of research on this, we're not always doing the things that research shows are most effective. And that's even when it comes down to the programs at schools. So the book is going to be for parents, but it's also going to be for educators. There's going to be chapters in there having to do with drug and alcohol education programs at school. And essentially, spoiler alert, it comes down to early interventions. It comes down to helping kids deal with a lot of social emotional learning stuff, making sure that they understand social cues and they're not too aggressive as children, all of that kind of stuff. And then getting really honest and transparent about your family history with addiction. I'm an alcoholic and I come from a long line of addicts and alcoholics, and so does my husband. And so, the way we talk to our children is very much in the spirit of, you have an increased risk of addiction. And so therefore we can't talk about, you're never, just say no is not going to work as a conversation for my children, because I have to have a lot of conversations about my own addictions and how I knew that I was an alcoholic and when I knew I was an alcoholic and the steps I went through and the process I went through of coming face to face with that and what that means for them and what kind of warning signs they're going to have to look for as they move through their lives, as people who are probably going to drink and probably going to experiment with some drugs. And that's, it turns out that approach as well is shown to be more effective than the just say no, or, not talking about, we know the opiate epidemic is caused by kids trying, prescription opiates, that are, that they steal out of someone's medicine cabinet, or that they're prescribed after they get them wisdom teeth pulled. And even though we know that, only 15% of parents report that they talk to their children about it. So, getting a little bit more honest about our own relationships with substances and talking about some of the things that can be a little bit scary to talk about, is going to be a big part of that. And really fun. I mean, I'm in the process right now of just research, keeping my mind as open as possible. And over the next year and a half, while I'm working on this book, I'll be able to, sort of get my arms around this vast, I'm just starting the interviews and just starting the research. So it's a really fun process.
That's awesome. I'm sure you've read Jess Shatkin's Born to be Wild, and how he talked about and that was really eye-opening, because that whole thing about, the current programs that are supposed to educate kids how, why they don't work and all of that. It was very interesting about the different approaches. So I'm really excited for this as someone who works with lots of teenagers and young adults at camp. I just know that they need something different than what they're getting right now. They're not getting the full picture of what's
and a lot of that comes down to also understanding how teenagers' brains work. And that's, for me, that the deep dive into that, talking about the neuroscience of adolescence and all of that stuff is, this is, so I joked before about when I'm out speaking, having to pinch myself and, I can't believe this is my life. I was out yesterday sitting in the backyard, with these little sticky notes all around me and a whole bunch of research books, and sitting in the yard reading about a subject that I'm absolutely fascinated with and that I'll get to write about once I'm done with this research. So it's pretty fun. I love the life of a journalist and a writer. It's really just beyond my wildest dreams.
Well, and because you love it so much, you come out with these great articles and books for all of us. So that's what's awesome. It's a win-win. Yeah. You get to do it.
Translating that stuff for my husband is a journalist as well, and writes about medicine and medical ethics mostly. And so the two of us love that sort of process of, getting past the jargon and getting towards explaining whatever it is, learning or neuroscience of adolescence, that kind of stuff, explaining that to people in a way that's clear is one of my favorite things to do.
So, as you were talking, I started thinking about the relationship between your two books. And is there, I'm sure you're still just starting all the research, but it seems to me like we are raising kids who not only don't want, they're worried about failure, and the parents are worried about failure, but they're also worried about any kind of pain, whether that's physical or emotional. And so therefore there's this whole feeling like, I know just, moms will post on, had a hard day, I'm going to go have my glass of wine. And it's sort of, they're being raised in this time that really we've modeled for them. And what culturally they're seeing is, you're not feeling well, take an Advil, do this, do that, so do you see that kind of, that sort of thing, that it's similar in that we need our kids to learn about that it's okay to fail and that they can learn from that, but also they need to learn how to deal with those kind of painful things that are going to come up in life?
Yeah, there's never before, this is the first moment in history when we, for the first time, expect that childhood should be pain-free. That's never been the expectation. And if you look at who's being prescribed opiates, pain medications for, wisdom teeth, stuff like that, it's more affluent kids that are getting those prescriptions, mainly because parents who believe that their kids shouldn't experience any pain, any discomfort, are pushing really hard to get those drugs prescribed. Now, the good news is that now, because this is such a problem, we are in the middle of an opiate epidemic. Doctors and oral surgeons are pushing back a little and saying, no, Advil should be fine. You can call if it gets bad enough. But for example, when my son had 5 wisdom teeth pulled, we said no thank you to the opiate prescription, simply because it's such a high percentage of people who take opiates. They're just so addictive that there was just no reason to mess with that. And if it was probably going to be fine with ibuprofen, and sure, there was going to be some breakthrough discomfort, but that's to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've gotten to a point now where not only do we not expect or not want our children to experience any physical pain, we tend to say those things like, oh, it's been such a hard day, I need a glass of wine. And that's become the expectation as well. And, sometimes that stuff that's uncomfortable, we actually have to deal with that as opposed to medicating ourselves out of it. So I'm in total agreement with you. And the more reading I do about, and the more talking I do with kids about their threshold for discomfort and pain, it just seems to be at an incredible low.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really worrisome to me.
Yeah. So hopefully your book will give us tools for helping our kids experience that, know and understand that discomfort is part of life. And maybe our way of talking about, like, even when you talked about how you talked with your kids about your own addictions and your family history and everything, that's a lot of it to me comes down to us sharing with our kids, wow, I had a really hard day. So I think I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to try to do, just sort of talking through your own strategies, maybe in terms of helping them learn how to,
Well, that's an incredible opportunity for kids that we tend to take away from them. That ability to sit there at dinner and say, you know what, I really screwed up at work today and I'm not sure what I'm going to do about it. And talking through the screw ups that we make or the discomfort that we have shows them, it models for them this appropriate, proactive response to mistakes and failures. And that's some of the most valuable teaching we do to our kids, because we do with our kids, because we can jabber on about, really only caring about the learning, or yes, I support you when you mess up. But unless they actually see us acting in a way where we're really putting our money where our mouth is, they don't tend to believe our words. They tend to believe what they see from us. And so it's really, really important that we let our kids see our discomfort as well.
Well, and probably deal with our own addictions. Like you said, that's kind of part of it is, that's the difficult thing. But, when we show kids and you model for them, it really does impact a lot of what their own outcomes are going to be. So that's difficult. That's a hard thing, but you have to kind of look really deeply at yourself as a parent too. Yeah.
There's this one interventionist, and she said, the problem is someone will ask me to come into their house and do an intervention on their kid who's addicted to opiates. And yet I'm supposed to not pretend like I don't see the fact that you have an obsession with food, and that, you're 150 pounds overweight, and that's how you're dealing with your pain. We can't selectively talk about addiction in this family, and yet that's often what people want. Oh no, I don't want my kid to drink, but yet I don't want to talk about what I'm doing. And that's the uncomfortable part. And that's where, Gift of Failure was very similar. Gift of Failure, I'm saying, look, yes, I'm irritated at you parents for being overly directive, but oh, whoops, I was overly directive myself too. And so there's this real line I have to walk when I'm talking about these uncomfortable things about overparenting or addiction, where I say, look, mea culpa, I've done the same thing. And therefore it's even more important to me that I figure out ways to be positive and change things. And I hope, the last thing I want to do is lecture anyone, because that's definitely not how I get people to listen. And it's not very proactive. It's not going to get us anywhere. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to look at, and that's hard to hear and hard to look at in ourselves. But it's really, really important, because kids do what they see. They don't do what we tell them to do.
That's what I'm always telling our counselors, that the best thing, like when we're teaching friendship skills, it's more how they see you being a friend is what they're going to learn the most from. It's all the modeling is the most powerful thing we all do. Okay, Jess, this has been amazing. I could talk to you for hours. This is so good. And I'm excited. I love the Gift of Failure, and I know I'm going to love, it's called the Addiction Inoculation. Is that right?
That's what it's called right now. Who knows?
Okay.
Maybe it'll stay that way. Maybe it won't. We'll see. Sometimes these things change, and the book, it isn't even due until 2019, and then won't come out till 2020. So lots could happen between now and then.
Right. But, the years go fast, so I'm sure it'll be here soon. So thank you so much for being on today. And I just have to mention, I really appreciate it's your birthday today. So happy birthday. It won't be when the podcast comes out, but how nice of you to take a little time on your birthday to chat with me. I really appreciate it. And I know
there's nothing I'd rather do on my birthday.
And I know that your your website, all your speaking, all your articles, and both The Gift of Failure and your new book are such amazing resources for parents. So on behalf of all the parents, thank you so much for the work you're doing.
You're welcome. And all of that stuff is at jessicalahey.com. So if you're trying to find any of that stuff, it's all there. Sorry about that. That's my telephone.
That's okay. Okay. Thanks so much for being on.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For notes, links, and more information about the topics Jess and I discussed in this episode, visit my website at sunshine-parenting.com and search for episode 43. I'll also have a link to Jessica's website where you can find information about The Gift of Failure, as well as many links to articles Jessica has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, and many other places. I'll leave you with a quote from The Gift of Failure. Every time we rescue, hover, or otherwise save our children from a challenge, we send a very clear message that we believe they are incompetent, incapable, and unworthy of our trust. Further, we teach them to be dependent on us and thereby deny them the very education in competence we are put here on this earth to hand down. But here's the truth. What research has shown over and over again: children whose parents don't allow them to fail are less engaged, less enthusiastic about their education, less motivated, and ultimately less successful than children whose parents support their autonomy.